Compound sentences and complex sentences join two ideas to show the relationship among the two ideas. You can join several ideas using a compound complex sentence. Compound complex sentences use techniques of both coordination and subordination. A compound complex sentence contains at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. For example, although many of her constituents disagree with her, the senator supports health care reform and she plans to vote in favor of the bill. Although many of her constituents disagree with her is the dependent clause. The senator supports health care reform and she plans to vote in favor of the bill are the independent clauses, the main ideas in the sentence. Another means of joining ideas to make your meaning clear is parallelism. With parallelism, you join related ideas with grammatically equivalent words, phrases, or clauses. In addition to being a stylistic device, parallelism is a grammatical requirement. For that reason, you need to study the different types of parallel structures in Chapter 25 of your textbook. One type of parallel structure is the balanced sentence. A balanced sentence puts two similar grammatical structures together to emphasize a strong comparison between the two ideas. It balances two different, usually opposing ideas by using structures that are similar. John Kennedy's famous ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country is an example of a balanced sentence because the two opposing ideas are presented in the same grammatical structure. In this case, there are two imperative sentences. Correlative conjunctions also create parallel structures. Correlative conjunctions are listed on page 400 of your text. One example of combining sentences using a correlative conjunction is the following sentence. The senator not only supports health care reform, but also plans to vote in favor of the health care reform bill. Not only, but also is one example of a correlative conjunction. Another way to combine ideas and to make your meaning clear is to use modifiers. Modifiers are words, phrases, and clauses that describe or limit the meaning of a sentence. They can be placed at the beginning of sentences, in the middle of sentences, or at the end. Four types of modifying phrases are participial phrases, appositives, absolute phrases, and prepositional phrases. You've already learned what a participial phrase is from sentence lecture 3. You can use a participial phrase to combine our two sentences about the senator. Being a strong supporter of health care reform, the senator voted in favor of the health care bill. This sentence uses the present participial, being a strong supporter of health care reform. You can also use the past participial phrase, convinced of the importance of health care reform, the senator voted for the health care reform bill. Convinced of the importance of health care reform is the participial phrase. Another type of phrase is an appositive, a phrase that renames a noun in a sentence. For example, the senator, a strong supporter of health care reform, voted for the health care reform bill. A strong supporter of health care reform renames the senator. That's the appositive phrase. An absolute phrase contains a participial form of a verb and a noun or pronoun, but it cannot stand alone as a sentence. For example, her mind made up, the senator voted in favor of the health care reform bill. Her mind made up is the absolute phrase. Finally, a prepositional phrase is a group of words that begins with a preposition. You probably remember prepositions from high school. Maybe you learned that a preposition described anything a squirrel can do to a tree or anything a plane could do to a cloud. Go over, under, around, through, in, out, behind. If you want to see a complete list of prepositions, they're on page 243 in Little Brown. So you can use a prepositional phrase to subordinate ideas as well. For example, the senator voted in favor of the health care bill under consideration. Or, within minutes, the senator decided to vote in favor of the health care bill. When using modifiers, you have to consider where to place them in the sentence. In the English language, you're required to place modifiers next to whatever they're modifying. Otherwise, you have a misplaced or dangling modifier. You can remember that from the grammar exam maybe, or you can look in Chapter 21 of Little Brown for more information on misplaced and dangling modifiers. You can still rearrange modifiers, though, to create different effects. If you begin with several modifiers and end with the main clause, you have a periodic sentence. If you begin with the main clause and add modifiers, you have a cumulative sentence. For example, you might have 4 boring subject-verb sentences that you want to combine. Bob stumbled in, his jeans were muddy, his shirt was torn, his face was scratched. You could combine these into a cumulative sentence using the absolute phrases. Bob stumbled in, his jeans muddied, his shirt torn, his face scratched. You could also use a periodic structure, which would begin with the modifiers. His jeans muddied, his shirt torn, his face scratched, Bob stumbled in. If you're writing a novel and Bob has been missing for several pages, the periodic sentence, which creates suspense, is probably the best choice. But the cumulative structure and the 4 boring subject-verb sentences are both correct, and depending on your meaning, they could be good choices too. Another way to emphasize your meaning is by using different forms of punctuation. Considering the following sentence, the healthcare reform is missing one key component, the public option. You can use a colon, a dash, or parentheses in place of a comma to integrate the information differently and therefore to change the emphasis of the sentence. A colon is like a trumpet announcing information. It should be used at the end of a complete sentence when the information following the colon explains or emphasizes the information in the sentence. For example, the healthcare reform bill is missing one key component, the public option. The dash interrupts information in a sentence or rushes additional information past the reader. For example, the healthcare reform is missing one key component, the public option. Parentheses downplay the information in a sentence. They're the equivalent of a whisper. So the same sentence would read, the healthcare reform bill is missing one key component, the public option. Unlike a colon, dashes and parentheses can be used to offset information in the middle of a sentence. With a colon, you have to have a complete sentence before you can use the colon. It comes at the end of a complete sentence to announce information. But dashes and parentheses can be used to offset phrases and clauses. For examples, see page 471 in Little Brown. Usually, anytime you can use a comma, you could use either parentheses or dashes instead. Another way to spice up your writing is to use an occasional imperative, interrogative, or exclamatory sentence. An imperative is a sentence that issues a mild command and uses the implied second person. For example, in the sentence, "Vote for Senator Smith, a strong supporter of health care reform," the subject is you, but it's implied instead of expressed directly. You have to be careful if you use imperative sentences. They can invite the use of second person, you, and the second person is usually not appropriate in academic essays. An interrogative is a sentence that asks a question, such as, "Why should voters elect Senator Smith?" Sometimes interrogative sentences are also rhetorical questions, questions the writer asks expecting a certain answer, such as, "Isn't it time we elected a senator who will stand up for what we believe?" In this sentence, the writer expects the reader will say, "Of course we should." The question, therefore, works as a rhetorical device. The writer is not going to answer the question, it's just used to engage the reader in what he's saying. Finally, an exclamatory sentence is a sentence that ends with an exclamation point. You should use these infrequently, and you should never use more than one exclamation point. I hope this lecture and the assigned reading help you understand that you can express the same ideas using different sentence structures. It's important that your sentences are correct, but you can write perfectly correct sentences that are not interesting and that do not effectively emphasize your meaning. So you need to study these different types of sentence structures, and to earn good grades on your essays, you need to implement some of these strategies for creating emphatic, varied sentences. For practice, you should now complete writing exercise 2.